There you are. Hello. Okay, so we will get started. I just will give you a brief introduction about Dr. Ackerman-Barger. She's an Associate Dean for Health Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, and Associate Clinical Professor at the Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing at UC Davis. So she also serves as the Director of Faculty Development for Education and Training, co-director for the Interprofessional Teaching Scholars Program, and researcher for Center for Diverse Healthcare Workforce at UC Davis Health. Her academic interests relate to health equity and social justice, and over her career, she's combined her expertise in nursing and education to advance inclusive learning environments, education equity, and workforce diversity. I came to know of her because I'm a fan of many of your articles of microaggressions in the learning environment, and when I knew that this was one of the topics I wanted to select for this event today, I wanted to have you. So I'm so happy, delighted that you accepted our invitation.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here with this group. Let me just give you a little bit about me as a person and how I came to this work, just to start to frame this conversation. I identify as mixed race. My mom is white, my dad is Black. And I feel like I've spent the majority of my life navigating these spaces that, are very different. Some people call it code switching, but my parents broke up when I was little. So there was this time when I was with my Black family and when I was with my white family, and there was a shift that needed to happen a lot. And that got me thinking about the concept of race and what does it mean? Why is it so different from household to household? And that got me to asking all kinds of different questions. Like when I decided that I wanted to become a nurse, I remember being in a nursing class and being told that, for cardiovascular disease, there are risk factors of, all these different risk factors, including race and ethnicity. And that didn't really make sense to me why that would be. And so that just made me curious about what would cause that? What's happening in the physiology? Of course, when I raised my hand, my teacher said a genetic predisposition. That didn't make sense to me. I have heard of this place. It's called Africa, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds, if not millions and millions, of Black folks who do not have the same outcomes as white folks, right? So that began these questions and the scholarship. So that's definitely an area of interest for me. I love exploring the physiology of and understanding the sociology, the politics, the psychology around health outcomes. Another thing that I became aware of, I grew up in a really white area. I don't know how familiar you are with California. I'm from Northern California. I'm so far north in California that we think of San Francisco as Southern California. And up at the top of California are mostly white people. It's kind of shocking once you start moving past San Francisco, very white. So I tended to be, one of the only people of color in whatever venue I was in. In nursing school, I definitely was the only person. And when I when I got on a tenure track at our nursing school, I was invited to talk with students of color about nursing. And I thought that I was going to be like, yay, come become a nurse. And that's not what it was. There were Black women who were tearfully recounting to me how excluded they felt, that nursing was a white woman's club and what they brought to nursing was not valued. So that began my scholarship around inclusive classroom environments. What does it look like to have inclusion? How does that impact the cognitive science, the ability to learn? And so I've done research on stereotype threat in health professions classrooms, and that moved me. When I did that, there was a lot of data that was qualitative data that was essentially examples of microaggressions. So I decided to do a multi-institutional study, mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative, on the experiences of microaggressions in our learning environments. And so I've published some articles on that. But really as I share that data, what people want is, we understand that this is happening. We're getting a sense of how this is happening in our classrooms. How do we deal with that. And so that's what I'm here to talk with you about today is the microaggressions triangle model. It focuses primarily on academic settings, but you'll see that you can actually apply this even if you're in the grocery store, right? It should be something that is somewhat universal. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm not able to go into presenter mode because I'm on my laptop, but you should be able to see my slides. And I'm just going to confirm. Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. So I would like to go over first what the triangle model, like the goals of the triangle model, and then tell you what the triangle model can't really do. So the first thing is that we wanted it to be a humanistic approach. And what I mean by humanistic approach is that we as individuals acknowledge that people are complicated and complex. I mean, we tend to understand that about ourselves. Like if I ask you to tell me about yourself, but you only get 3 sentences, you're going to feel really, really constrained because you're more complicated than 3 sentences. So we often understand that about ourselves, but don't extend that to other people. We tend to go into a binary. Is this a good person or a bad person? Is this person racist or not racist? Are they homophobic or not? As if, you know, it's just these clear-cut buckets that you're either in or not. But here's the reality of the matter is that you can be both. You can be both in the same moment. You can be both, you know, one earlier in the day and later in the day. I like to think about, you know, when I'm at work, I feel like, you know, for the majority of the day, I am living up to my values of, you know, health equity, diversity, inclusion. I try to treat everybody with kindness and respect. And I might do that all day. And then I'm driving home and somebody cuts in front of me, right? And then up goes my finger and out come these words. Does that now make me a bad person? No, that means that I am a complicated person with multiple dimensions and that I can be living my values and at one moment and not at the other. And so this notion that anybody is binary is really not true. And we need to acknowledge that. This is a way to promote inclusion excellence. And so in doing that, you have to have a thought process about it. And sometimes the thought process is this an opportunity to promote inclusion and teaching? And so inherently, you're going to have times when it's like, yes, this is the moment. I can really help my community, my organization move forward. And there might be times when you say, this is not the moment. This one is too painful for me. I'm not in the mood. There's a safety issue. This is not the right time. And both of those decisions are okay. But what I'm asking is that people stop and think for a moment about what sort of the pathway would be from this moment to the next moment. It's about prevention of microaggressions. And so the only people whose behavior we can control is our own. And so if we're going to prevent microaggressions, we need to prevent ourselves from being the source of, or at least to minimize the amount of times that you're the source of. And then when you realize that you're the source of a microaggression, trying to get back into that conversation and, you know, repairing, reestablishing who you are and what you want to contribute to your community. It can be about, if we think about restorative justice, it can be about repairing and reestablishing relationships. Is it possible to move on in a way where we can learn and grow together? Also about restoring reputations. This is part of the restorative justice model. Also, I've separated it in this moment in time because this talks about cancel culture. So canceling, yep, it's a tool in this, you know, maybe tool belt of strategies that we have. I would call this the nuclear option. And sometimes you need to do the nuclear option, but usually you don't want to start with that. And so, you know, I think of, do I want to be defined by this moment in time where I said something that was insensitive, that represented my bias? Does that have to be what I'm known for? Piri, the person that blah, blah, blah. Or is it a moment in time where Piri was able to learn and grow and become a better person? And can we extend that to other people, right? So I think that when people are in fear of being canceled, they're not going to engage in the conversations. And if we're not having the conversations, we're not going to move the needle forward, right? So consider whether you really want to use cancel culture or not. Is that the tool that's appropriate in this moment? What the model is not. People often ask me, well, what's the right thing to say? Or this person said this, and what's the right thing? I can't give you a map. And, you know, I know that for those of us in healthcare, we love us a good algorithm. You know, if somebody comes in and, you know, they have a funny heart rhythm, we can ask these questions. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it narrow? Is it wide? Does it have a blood pressure? Does it not? And we get this tree that just guides us. And there's something really comforting in that. Human interaction, you know, as psychiatrists, it's not that formulaic. We have to be making decisions, and there's a really heavy duty cognitive process that has to happen. So what I'm hoping to do is give you a framework for thinking and making decisions about how to address a microaggression. I want you to know that it's not appropriate for every situation, especially if there's overt racism or discrimination happening. This is not like, hey, let's promote inclusion. You might need to take a different route. If there's a power dynamic, the individual may need to seek help from someone else rather than trying to address it in the moment. And again, that's part of that decision tree. The other thing is that I really want to spend some time authentically stepping into the shoes of people on different points of the triangle model. So it's going to be important for us to try, when these are happening, not to take sides and to decide who's right or wrong. Again, that's a binary. Usually it's far more complicated than that. So we want to think about who is involved, why is this happening, and what do we need to do to, you know, move the relationship forward to promote inclusion excellence. So I want to start with Dr. Chester Pierce. I love this photo of him. I am convinced, I haven't done the genealogy, but I want to go back and see if somehow we might be sharing some DNA. This is Dr. Chester Pierce. He was a psychiatrist. We lost him in 2016, but his legacy continues. He was from Harvard University. So the first time we ever saw the term microaggression in the literature was in a chapter that he wrote in 1970. So Chester Pierce, in his research and in his contributions, he actually was talking about the experience of African-American people. So these are people who are having the experience of Black folk in America, which can be very different than Black folk from Africa, right? And so he was doing research about some of the ways that Black people were portrayed, particularly on television commercials, that it was very stereotypical in a negative way. Black people were only seen in the context of eating food or doing hard labor. They were never seen within the context of being a professional, within a family unit, or as images of beauty. So he coined this term to talk about those daily sorts of slights on television commercials. Every day you're drinking in this thing. So since then, many people have expanded upon the notion of microaggressions. There are several really amazing scholars. One is Daryl Wing Su, probably the most prolific scholar around microaggressions. And some of the things that he has contributed to this notion is that microaggressions can be experienced by multiple different identities. So here's a definition that is a conglomeration of Kevin Nadal and Daryl Wing Su. Microaggressions are subtle statements and behaviors that unconsciously communicate denigrating messages to individuals or groups based on some aspect of their identity. And I want to say that sometimes they're unconscious, but sometimes they're consciously done as well. The other thing that Daryl Wing Su did is he created these subgroups of microaggressions. I don't expect anybody to memorize these, but I do want to go over them just so you have a sense of the depth and breadth of how they can manifest. So usually micro assaults are what you think of when you think of a microaggression. So those are intentional, they're explicitly derogatory, verbal or nonverbal attacks. A good eye roll, that can definitely be a microaggression. So the things that are a little more subtle are the micro insults that are rude and insensitive, subtle put downs of someone's heritage or someone's identity. And I'll give you a couple examples of that on the next slide. Micro-invalidations are remarks that diminish, dismiss, or negate the realities and histories of groups of people. So when you hear people saying, we're in a post-racial society, there's no such thing as racism or systemic racism, that is a statement that, not only is it negating the science, the both quantitative and qualitative data that show us that racism still continues in our country, but it is just basically telling people that what you're experiencing is not true. It's very invalidating. So another way that you can see this happening are folks that say, I've never seen racism, so it must not exist, right? And that's a very I'm the center of the universe, and any experience that people have is going to come through me at some point, right? That is also an example of a micro-invalidation. So these are microaggressions. These are more specifically micro insults. I told you that we would go over that a little bit more. So some examples of those. The experience that a lot of people from many backgrounds, but particularly Asian or Hispanic Latinx, is feeling like you're an alien in your own land. So say that you are Korean American, just for example, being asked, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Bakersfield, or I'm from Wisconsin. And people say, no, where are you really from? As if you cannot be fully American if you don't look white. Right. And so that is something that is a micro insult. The other thing is commentary about English. Wow, you speak good English. Well, yes, of course I speak good English. I was born here, or I came here as a child, or I have been working really hard most of my life to speak English well. So yes, yeah, big deal. Or the opposite of that, that if you don't speak English like I do, then you don't deserve to be in higher education or to be in health professions, etc. The next one, ascription of intelligence. So this is that thing that exists in the minds of many people and is based on our history of eugenics, that some people, based on the color of their skin or their race and ethnicity, are smarter or less smart. And so the ones that really stand out are that people of color are less smart than white people. And this has its history. If you know who created the SAT, Carl Brigham, he was a scientist, a eugenicist, who was out to prove that people of color were not as intelligent and should not be in schools of medicine, law, etc. He also included Jews and Italians and all these groups. He was trying to prove scientifically that this was true. And we live the legacy of the SAT that's still used to this day. And we still live the legacy of these belief systems that often are unconscious beliefs, but that is seen. So this might manifest as somebody being impressed, like, wow, you did a great job on that. You're really a credit to your race. Seems like it would be a compliment, except for that horrible feeling in the bottom of my stomach. Or questioning somebody, did you really get an A on that exam? And, having talked with so many students and having had this experience as well, that when I got the high grade on a physics exam, I was accused of cheating. Like, it's impossible for a girl, and particularly a girl of color, to have gotten the high grade on this exam. So yeah, my mom was called in and there was a conversation about, did I cheat on this exam or not? So that's that not believing that somebody could accomplish something like that. Color blindness. When I look at you, I don't see color. So let's just put this into historical context, that color blindness was an improvement in the 60s and 70s in the wake of a time when we had a hyper focus on color, trying to figure out what water fountain people should drink from, where people should sit on the bus, what hospital you can go to, etc. So color blindness was an improvement then, but in the 50 to 60 years since then, we know that that's not the place that we want to be. I don't think anybody wants you to look at them and pretend that you don't see some aspect of them because it's inferior or dirty or yucky. Like I don't like that when people are like, oh, or, no offense, but are you black? You know, like it's not offensive until you suggest that it could be, right? So yes, you do see color. That's not necessarily a bad thing at all. I heard the previous speaker talk about the book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste. If you're asking that question to figure out where somebody is in the caste system and how you fit into that caste system, yeah, that's a yucky reason to ask about color. But if you're trying to get to know me and what my experiences are, I want you to see me for every part of who I am. America is a melting pot. Nice notion, not something that is actually happening. We are just as segregated as we have ever been. I heard somebody recently in a book that I'm reading say that we're not like a melting pot. We're more like those cafeteria trays that have the segmented, like here's for this food and here's for this food. So that's more like what we are living. Criminality. The assumption that people of color are somehow more prone to crime and violence. And so we'll see this as a person of color being followed in a store because it's assumed that if you're black in a store that you're there to shoplift, or a white person clutching their bag near a person of color, or a patient feeling like I don't want to have a black provider because they're somehow a danger to me. They're going to hurt me in some way. All of those are microaggressions. Denial of individual racism. I couldn't possibly be racist because I have a black friend, or I can't possibly be homophobic because I have a child that is gay, right? Like those things can coexist. Yes, you can have a black friend and still have racist notions. You can have a child who is gay and still have these notions about gay people and behave in a particular way. Again, remember, we're complicated. We can occupy both of those spaces at the same time. I added one about the myth of meritocracy. Everyone can succeed if they just work hard. Like this, let me just be clear that success does take hard work. All of us who have been successful have worked hard, but we got to keep in mind that there are people that are working just as hard as us or even harder and not able to make it through the structures that were designed to impede their success, right? So this is not quite true that everyone can succeed if they just work hard. The most qualified person should get in and get the position. And this sounds great on the surface until we start talking about that really important word, qualified. What does qualified look like? Who gets to decide that? At what point does it become subjective in our known biases? Like we're only going to take people from these elite schools, and if you come from a community college or a lesser known college, you can't possibly be as smart as, right? So we really need to think about what qualified means. The myth of diversity. So the value of diversity is not a myth, but the myth of diversity that we had to lower our standards to get diversity is a microaggression. We could call that an institutional microaggression, or the notion you were only admitted or hired as the diversity student or employee. I experienced this, that I was competing with other white women for a tenure track position. When I got the position, multiple people said I only got it because I was the diversity hire. Forget all the publications, forget the student evaluations and the accomplishment over a lifetime of teaching and being a nurse. That was the assumption, and it was deeply hurtful. It negated all of my accomplishments and made it seem like I was getting something that I didn't deserve and that I had taken something away from white women. Some other examples said to a nurse, "You're so smart. Why didn't you become a doctor?" And I know that all of you are doctors, and I am so happy for pride of profession. I also have pride of profession. Didn't choose to become a nurse because I couldn't become a doctor. I chose to become a nurse because nursing was what appealed to me. That's the way that I wanted to be in health professions, right? We talked about the being told you're a credit to your race. Said to a Black medical student, "You were only admitted because you're Black." It is really hard for white men to get admitted these days. These are actual quotes from the research that I've done. This one said to a male nurse, this isn't from research, this is from a conference where this was said. "I didn't know that men could be so caring." So yeah, men can be nurturers. Said to a student about with they them pronouns on their badge, Young people these days can't even decide if they are a boy or a girl. I applaud the person that said this because it's a double-barreled microaggressions. You actually microaggressed young people, that's ageist, and then trans people, which is transphobic, right? So multiple things going on in there. Microaggressions are not always consciously done. Again, they're often the output of unconscious bias. They're powerful because they're subtle and sometimes invisible, especially those that don't share the targeted identity. So we can often think about the microaggressions that we've experienced and we can relate to those, but sometimes we don't understand somebody else's identity that we don't share and how they experience microaggressions. We got to keep in mind that for the recipient, when they're experiencing a microaggression, they're having a strong emotion. They're experiencing stress and a threat. And at the same time, they have to figure out what was meant and they have to figure out how to respond to that microaggression. And it seems like there's no way to respond to that in a nice, graceful way. I want to talk about the health impact of microaggressions. So we know from the literature that there is a relationship between microaggressions and the experiences of anxiety and depression, right? Like that's been shown over and over again. We also know that there's a relationship between anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and, successful suicides. So if you look at it from that lens, it may seem like a microaggression is this small thing, but it can lead eventually to something that is life-threatening, right? And that's a negative health outcome that we don't want our students, we don't want our colleagues, we don't want our patients to be experiencing, and these things are preventable. The other piece of it is that it can create physical health problems in the form of allostatic load. I'm not sure how much you're familiar with the term allostatic load. It essentially refers to the wear and tear or the weathering of the body over time from stress. The two biomarkers for allostatic load are increased blood pressure and the presence of stress hormones in the body. And if you think about the role of stress, like it has this important role. It gets us motivated to go to work when we otherwise wouldn't want to go to work, right? Or to study for an exam or to leap out of the way of a truck when it's barreling down on us when we're in the crosswalk. But it's hugely resource intensive, and our bodies are designed to recover from that. We go into the parasympathetic mode, we restore, we repair, and all of that is great, except that the way that the stress system works is that you can get stuck in it. Like the stress system turns on and it needs something to let us know to turn it off, right? And so if you're getting microaggression after microaggression, you're in this continual state of, and the body kind of forgets how to turn that off. And if you don't have time in between episodes to restore, you're having physical outcomes from that. And so I don't know if any of you saw that video that was around on the internet maybe 6 months ago of a young man who was out hiking. And he came in between a mama cougar and her baby cougars, and he's filming it with his iPhone. It was terrifying to watch. This huge cougar is like doing this, stalking him, and he's backing up, and you can hear his voice as he's narrating. He's like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get out of this alive. Like she stalked him for a long time. And I think about what was happening in his body. Think about what was happening in his body at the level of the cardiovascular system. Tachycardia, increased contractility, increased conductivity to create more cardiac output so that he has the oxygen, the nutrients needed to go to his muscles and his vital organs so that he could deal with the stressful event. If you think about what's happening in his body in this moment at the level of the pancreas and the liver, more available in the bloodstream so that he has the energy to, fight, flight, or to freeze. At the level of his metabolic system and his gut, things are taking a back seat. Everything is slowing down because that's not a priority. At the level of the immune system, back seat, not important to heal from a paper cut right now. And the reproductive system, that's not the priority. Survival in this moment is the priority. So again, all of those things, our bodies, if it's short term, our bodies recover, restore. If it's chronic, it becomes a chronic illness. Let's go back to all of those states in terms of chronic stress. We talked about, increased cardiac output, hypertension. That creates a process in the heart. Hypertension is related to dysrhythmias, cardiomegaly, clots. You can have thinning of the cardiovascular system such that you're more prone to cardiovascular disease. So hypertension, cardiovascular disease. Why do African American, Hispanic, Native American have higher rates of these things? Could it be the experience of microaggressions or discrimination or experiences of racism that build up over time? We know that it can't be a physiological thing because we have this whole continent of people that are not having the same outcome as, African Americans. Africans have different outcomes than African Americans. At the level, so cardiovascular disease, hypertension, at the level of the pancreas and liver, it's called something when there's sugar in your blood all the time. That's called diabetes, right? Why are there higher rates of that? When we talk about the GI system and the metabolic system, yeah, that can look like, ulcers, constipation, changes in metabolism. A sluggish metabolism can look like obesity over time. At the level of the immune system, immune disorders or chronic illness. At the level of the reproductive system, when that system is not getting the energy that it needs, that can look like poor maternal health outcomes and low infant birth weights, right? So that starts to talk about, there's the social determinants of health right there. That's why we see increased disease processes for certain groups of people when otherwise it should not be that way. So, you can argue, yes, a microaggression is not going to cause you to have a cardiovascular disease, but it's the accumulation over time that can be problematic. So mental health effects, physical health effects. Then for our patients, if they're experiencing microaggressions from the healthcare community, they're not going to trust us and they're not going to want to come see us. So let's just take a person who's living with obesity. If you know that every time you come to see your provider, you're going to get a lecture on lifestyle changes, all you need to do is diet and exercise. It's super easy. If you just did that, you wouldn't be struggling with obesity, right? As if it were so easy. If it were so easy, everybody would be doing it. It wouldn't be an issue. It's far more complicated than that. But simplifying it is an invalidation of the experience of how hard it is to live with obesity, right? So if people don't trust us and they're going to avoid us, they're going to wait until they're really, really sick before they come see us. And that's creates a health outcome as well. Let's talk about social and cognitive impacts of microaggressions. They perpetuate stereotypes and passively allow society to value groups. So every time the community doesn't say something when a microaggression or a stereotype is happening, we are learning that it's okay to say these kinds of things, and people become more bold in it. It also causes energy to be diverted away from learning and productivity. So if I'm spending time trying to figure out what you meant or what somebody meant, I'm trying to figure out what to say, I'm processing that, that's taking energy away from my prefrontal cortex that I could be using to learn or to make really good informed clinical decisions. And so we need to keep in mind that there is a cognitive effect to this that is not helping the healthcare community at all. It's not helping with our outcomes. A little bit of vocabulary before we go into the microaggressions triangle model itself. So the term micro and microaggression does not refer to the impact that it has on the recipient. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, that one was a really bad one. That's a macroaggression. So macroaggression is a word, but when Chester Pierce talked about this, he was talking about physical violence. He was talking about lynching. If we're to talk about macroaggressions today, what George Floyd, what Ahmaud Arbery, what Breonna Taylor, what Jacob Blake, what all of these, I could go on and on with names, what they experienced was a macroaggression. That was physical harm that occurred. So yes, a microaggression can be deeply damaging, traumatic. You can carry that around for the rest of your life, but it's still a microaggression because those things happen every day. Fortunately, macroaggressions don't happen as often as microaggressions. Are happening far too often, for sure, but not as often. And then as the term microaggression is turning into a theory, Daryl Wing Su and his colleagues use that term to talk about the way that institutions allow microaggressions to thrive. And that sort of medium allows macroaggressions to then exist. Like, the experience of police violence, like it's microaggression after microaggressions that allow macroaggressions to become sustained and accepted in our society. And when I say accepted, I don't want to negate the many protests against that. Those have been amazing, but yet they continue to happen. These shootings continue to happen, and people are getting away with it. That's what I mean, that it's accepted. Let's talk about the triangle model itself. So I want to spend some time getting into the shoes of each of these roles. So for the recipient, most of us can think of times when we've been the recipient of a microaggression. In fact, we could spend the rest of the session, the rest of the day, just testifying about the many microaggressions that we've experienced. It's interesting, though, that when we start asking, well, when have you been the source of? Ask yourself, when have you been the source of? The examples don't come as quickly. And does that mean that you haven't been the source of a microaggression? Like, I would love to think that I have never been the source of a microaggression. That makes me a good person, right? And I'm living up to my values. Never having been the source of a microaggression makes me feel good. The likelihood that that's true, I actually happen to know for a fact that it's not true. But the likelihood that that's true for any of us is zero or even less than zero. We are all the source of a microaggression. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Why can't you think of those times? There's a few processes. One is that if it is indeed the product of your unconscious bias, you have no idea that you did it. If you do become aware that you've done it, there are a couple of things that your mind will do for you. And one of them is that you can take that experience or memory and you can sort of abscess it, just push it aside until you actually forget about it. That's a form of protection of your brain, keeping in mind that when you become aware that you're the source of a microaggression or not living up to your values, that's actually a form of pain. And you're trying to protect yourself from pain. So you abscess it until you can actually forget about it. The other process that you'll do when you become aware that you're the source is you'll start this process of rationalization. That wasn't my intent. I didn't mean to do that. They're misinterpreting it. In fact, I'm the victim. You might even you have changed that narrative so that you're the victim. I can't believe that somebody would imply that I'm a racist. How horrible of them. How could they? I've been microaggressed, right? So we got to be aware of those processes. So all of those are processes that each of us are prone to, but each of us has the ability to interrupt those processes. The bystander is a really important role. And I think that a lot of us are very conflict aversive. So we see a microaggression happening and we don't want to be involved. We're going to avoid conflict, or we want to take both sides. We want to be Switzerland. And the best way to be Switzerland is to be like, oh, this is an uncomfortable conversation. It's time for my lunch break. Gotta go, right? And we exit. But here's the thing is that that's not benign. There's no Switzerland, right? Like you leaving and not saying anything is having its impact. You've communicated to both people, the recipient, that thing that just happened was okay with you, to the source that thing was not important and was not worth mentioning. And that allows an environment, a non-inclusive environment, to thrive. So I think we can say that we've all been on some aspect of this triangle. So how do we respond when we're in all aspects of that triangle? And that's what I'd like to go over next. Change slides. There we go. This is actually a quote from an individual that I interviewed. We'll call him Rick, and this will sort of be our ongoing scenario. So he says, classmates were asking, okay, what did you get on the exam? And people responded, I got an A, a B, or I have to retake it, things like that. And I didn't want to mention it, but I was specifically asked what I'd gotten. So I said, I got 100% on this exam. And people didn't believe it for some reason. Even though other people had a similar grade, everyone was kind of surprised that I got such a high score and I didn't have to retake it. I can't help but wonder if it's because I'm Black. So this scenario has been really interesting. I've done some piloting and beta testing, and this one is interesting because it tends to be polarized, where people say, this is so clearly a microaggression and bias or even racism that it's not even worth having a conversation about. Another group of people say, this is so clearly not a microaggression. This is just somebody being surprised. It's so hard to get 100% on any health professions exam. That's what it's about. So I think that that's important because both of those things can be happening at the same time. And neither of them are right or wrong. It's a matter of understanding where the conversation is coming from and trying to put yourself into the shoes of the people that are experiencing this thing. So that's our ongoing scenario. So what I want to get into is we're going to talk about the recipient and the action approach. This acronym we didn't create. Here's a citation of the folks that wrote this one. It's a really good article. A in action is about asking clarifying questions. So a clarifying question might just be, when you said this, I heard it like this. Is that what you meant to say? And this can be really, really crucial in if the two of you are having a very different understanding of what's happening in the conversation, we can take care of that early before it progresses. And I remember having a conversation. It was with my boss. It was about patient care and where we were going to put a patient. And I used a turn of phrase that I didn't really mean anything by, but I said something and it hit her in a particular way. After we figured out where the patient was going, she said, Piri, when you said this, what did you mean by that? And as soon as she fed it back to me, I heard how she heard it and how hurtful that could have been. And I was so grateful that she asked that question so that I could apologize and clarify and be aware of what I had said and how inappropriate it was in that moment. And she could have easily not have said anything to me and gone and told everybody what a jerk I was and how insensitive I was. But she had faith in my ability to learn and grow and to hear her and to hear that question. So in some ways, you can see that as being a gift when somebody asks a clarifying question. Try to come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. So this just means that you pause for a moment and you ask, why would an otherwise good and decent person behave in this way? And so that just shifts your mind to a moment of trying to move out of the limbic system when you're the recipient to ask that question, where are they coming from? And the answer to that might be, yes, they are a jerk. They're not a good and decent person, right? Or it may be that it's ignorance, or they were trying to connect with me in a way that really lacked grace. It can be that it was a power trip, like all of those things, but you just want to spend some time processing that and asking that question. You might tell them what you saw in a factual manner. You might do impact exploration, that moment where you're like, ouch, hang on a second. Or you might even go further with that and say, ouch, and explain what your thoughts and feelings are around that, and talk about next steps, if there are any next steps. Through all of this, as the recipient, you need to be observing the source to see where you're going. If they're shutting down and becoming defensive, you may not want to continue. If they're like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about it that way, that might be a way that you can actually engage and have a teachable moment. So just some side notes for the recipient. People often say, what do I do? And so the first thing I want the recipient to know is that when you are being mistreated, when you're experiencing a microaggression, you are in an impossible situation where there's not going to be some neat, nice way to exit that interaction. That's what makes microaggressions so icky and difficult to deal with. So whatever you decide has to be the right decision. So if you decide to engage, yep, that can be right. If you decide not to engage, that you're not going to address this right now or ever, that's an okay decision too. You got to do what's right for you. What you want to be careful of is not responding in a way that makes the situation worse or even makes you seem like the micro or like the aggressor. And so this can happen in multiple ways. I've seen students that are being mistreated get so frustrated that like one student was trying to tell faculty what had happened to her. Like she had a really legitimate complaint where her safety was, in question, and her faculty weren't listening to her. And in frustration, she banged her hand on the table. And they're just like, oh my God, she's so unprofessional. She got written up and, all this stuff when she had a really legitimate thing that the faculty needed to hear and weren't hearing in that moment. She got frustrated. Right. And that made it worse for her. Or sometimes students will go to Twitter or Instagram and complain about the clinical site, their rotation, or the school, and it ends up backfiring. Like, yep, you got out of school, but now people see that on social media and you can't get a job now. You don't want to make things worse. So you want to think things through. So think about whether you're safe both physically, like that is imperative. You don't want it to escalate into a place where there's physical harm, but also in terms of your status. For students, for residents, this can be a very vulnerable time where your status is really can be impaired by people that have power over you that will leverage that power. And I would like to be able to tell recipients, like, institutions are not allowed to retaliate. We have anti-retaliation policies. Yeah, that's all and good, except that the institution really can't do anything about those intangible ways that faculty or bosses can retaliate. Poisoning the well, that can be a career ender for people. The evaluation that's mediocre, the grading system, which we know is subjective, right? As an administrator, those are really hard things to tie a faculty member down on and to hold them accountable for. I'm just going to keep it 100% real. I don't want recipients to respond in the context of the world as it should be, but as the world as it actually is. And sometimes that your status is something that needs to be considered. There are times when I have advised students, like, I don't know that I can protect you from this faculty member. So we might want to hang on to this. It's up to you, but we might want to hang on to this until you're out of this rotation. Addressing the issue at a later time does not mean that you're letting it go. You might want to seek the wise counsel of a trusted mentor or friend that can help you make an informed plan about how to respond. So sometimes you need 24 hours, 48 hours just to feel the emotions, to be pissed off about it. I actually experienced a microaggression not too long ago. It took me a month and a half to process it and get to the place where I was able to respond in a way that was promoting inclusion rather than all the mean things, all the many ways that I wanted to put this person in their place and explain to them what a horrible person they were. After that month and a half, I was able to engage in a way with this individual that we have stayed in relationship. We're continuing with our collegial relationship and our friendship, but it took me some time to process it and talk with people so that I could process it. Addressing it in the moment is also an option, but think about your motivation. If your motivation is revenge or to get back or to gotcha or a cancel moment, it may not go in the direction that you want it to go. It can exacerbate it, make it worse. So just think for a moment about what it is that you want to get out of this situation. What is your ultimate goal? Reporting the incident can give the institution the opportunity to create a more supportive environment. It will not give you any quick satisfaction. And oftentimes the institution cannot, because of confidentiality, follow up and tell you what happened. But I know that on my end of it, reading these reports, I get a sense of who. Do we have people that are doing this frequently? And often there are topics that come up related to the politics in our country that, inform some of the talks and some of the interventions that we need to have as an institution. So going back to our scenario, what can the recipient say to the source? So Rick might say, you seem surprised that I got a high grade. Are you surprised by that? You could also say, I want to understand your surprise a little bit better. Can you explain to me why you're so surprised? You might say what you observed in a factual manner. I noticed that when you asked some of the other students about their grade, you didn't express the same level of surprise. You might do impact exploration. This might say, ouch, your surprise makes me feel like people doubt my ability and intellect. Or if you wanted to go deeper into your own thoughts and feelings, you might say, it's difficult being the only Black student in our cohort. People often think I'm here only to fulfill a diversity goal. It's hard because I've always done really well in school. And again, you're assessing the source to see what next steps might be, right? Let's look at when you're the source of a microaggression, right? I want you to think about how you feel, what's happening for you when you're the source. This will help you as the recipient to think about, how can I engage? How would I respond if I heard this? So the first thing is to acknowledge that you have bias. There's just absolutely no way that you have existed in an environment with other people within a society, whatever your background is, without bringing in some sort of bias. We drink it in. It's kind of like, saying that you live in Los Angeles or New York and you don't breathe in the smog. Yes, you breathe in the smog, and you take in the stereotypes about other people. And we need to unpack that in a way that is authentic. I don't know if you've ever heard this analogy between flossing your teeth and unconscious bias, that you should probably floss your teeth multiple times a day, but at least once a day, at least daily. You might dig in there and find some stuff that you really didn't want to revisit. It's yucky, nasty, but you get it out of there. You take care of it. You put it away. Same with unconscious bias. You should be working on that daily, and you're going to find some icky things, but rather than ignoring it, pretending it's not there, or denying that it's there, you should get that out. The other part of that is that when somebody tells you that there's something in your teeth, you don't say to them, you're being too sensitive, or how dare you say that? That's against my value system. You go look in the mirror and get that out. Same with unconscious bias, that if somebody has gifted you with feedback, that they're having faith in your ability to learn and grow. That's a gift that they've given to you. So you should say thank you for that. But listen to it and deal with that, take that in. And you may think of a time also when you've seen something in somebody else's teeth and you didn't tell them, right? And that just says how hard it is, so that when people actually do tell you, that is indeed a gift. So the apology should be authentic. You should focus on the impact. You can say, if it's true, my intent was not to harm you, but hearing what you're telling me, I see the impact of what I've said or what I've done, and I'm truly sorry. If you can name the thing that you've done, shows that you authentically understand. Like telling somebody, I'm really sorry that you're offended. That's not an apology. That's actually blame. There's something wrong with you because you're offended. It's not my fault, right? So if you can name the thing, that shows that you're really engaged, thoughtful, and understanding what's going on. So notes for the source. Avoid becoming defensive. If somebody is questioning you or giving you feedback, you making it, becoming defensive is making it all about yourself, right? Oh my gosh, you're doing it, and going on and on. A lot of times I've had this happen where somebody becomes aware that they've been the source. And now as the recipient, I need to spend 45 minutes listening to them explain to me how they have a Black friend and what they really meant and this and that. They're asking more from me. Not only were you the source of a microaggression, now I have to give you my time and soothe you, right? Like, don't be that sort of source. You can apologize. You can briefly say the intent. Don't ask for forgiveness. That's, again, you're asking for something from the recipient. You can say, I hope you are willing to let me show you that I can do better, or I would like to show you that I do better. Like, that would be okay. But really, if somebody is telling you something, whether it was your intent or not, just listen. This is a learning opportunity for you. Even if you authentically didn't mean it, somebody received it in that way, and you want to avoid having somebody receive it in that way in the future. So remember about confirmation bias, that we like to take in information that confirms our worldview. If my worldview is that I'm a good and decent person, that I am not racist, that I hold values of diversity and inclusion, I'm going to take in all the information that confirms that. And I'm going to tend to reject any information that contradicts that. And so that can be a psychological fallacy on our part. The other thing is commitment confirmation. And just simply put, this is where we become more attached to being right than to understanding the truth. More attached to being right than understanding the truth. I'm just going to call out myself and all healthcare providers. We do this all the time, where we're arguing about, whatever with patient care. We so want to be right about it. And we will put the truth, we'll just sacrifice it because we want to be right. So we will do this in our minds as well. And so the other thing is to recognize that there's more than one truth that can be happening in a moment. There's the truth of what you're experiencing and the truth of what somebody else is experiencing, and those can coexist. There's no singular truth. And let me just give you an analogy. I want you to think about one of those inflatable beach balls. You know, those beach balls that have the different stripes. There's a white stripe, a red stripe, blue stripe, yellow stripe, right? So let's say that without having told you about the ball, I actually put the ball right up in front of your face. And I ask you to use your science to tell me what color this ball is. And you're looking at it right up close to your face, and you are using the empirical data that's available to you. You're going to observe the data, you're going to report the data, and you say that's a red ball. Everything that you see is telling you that that's a red ball. But then when we put it away from you, you see, yeah, you were right. It's a red ball, and it's a blue ball, and a yellow ball, and a white ball. So within these relationships, within these encounters, these interactions, there can be multiple experiences that are happening at the same time. And we need to understand those if we're going to be able to address those in whatever point of the triangle we're coming in on. So if you're the source and you're going to use the assist approach, acknowledging your bias on a daily basis, seeking feedback. So you may notice, you might say, I noticed when we were talking about exam grades, you became quiet. How was that interaction for you? Like, you may not know what happened, but you know something happened. We talked about saying sorry and focusing on the intent. Focusing on the impact rather than the intent. And then really those authentic thank yous, thanking people for the feedback. I appreciate you taking the time to help me grow as a person. We are going to go into the bystander approach. So with the bystander approach, we will use the ARISE model. So the A stands for awareness of microaggressions. So you're probably aware of the way that you experience microaggressions, but are you aware of the ways that other people experience microaggressions? Are you constantly learning and taking in, like, every time somebody tells you or there's a conversation about a microaggression, you can be learning about somebody else's experience. I identify as a straight cisgendered woman who really cares about the LGBTQ plus community. I have a daughter who is in the LGBTQ plus community. I really care. And I also find myself having really heteronormative tendencies, right? And so I'm trying to pay attention to the way that other people are experiencing me. I had a student that came up after class at one point and pointed out to me, I'm from California and from a coastal area. So I'm part of a surfer community. I say dude all the time. My family says dude. My kids call me dude. They call me my dude, and I call them dude right back, right? It's just part of our conversation. It's kind of a meaningless filler word, but this young person came and told me, you use the word dude and guys all the time. Are you aware that that's gendered language? And it was like, no, I hadn't really ever thought about that. What a gift that was. And I can be aware how my language impacts other people. I also use the word lame, like, oh, that was so lame. When I thought about the word, I'm like, what is that word? What am I even saying? Right. So it brought this level of awareness that, you know, those aren't my experiences, but those can be somebody else's experiences. So responding with empathy. So again, this is asking for the source. Why would an otherwise good and decent person behave in this way? And also for the recipient, why would a good and decent, strong person have this emotional response? A lot of times when people are experiencing a microaggression and say something about it, we'll say things like, oh, you need to grow a tougher skin. If you're going to succeed in health professions, you need to just grow a thicker skin, which is just so egotistical of us because we have no idea what somebody else's skin looks like. You know, if we're going to use that metaphor of having a thicker skin, you don't know what my skin is like looking at me. I might have open wounds, and you've just stuck your finger in one of those open wounds of doubting my intellect or that I should be here in this place. my skin could be covered in scar tissue so that it's really sensitive. I actually do have I've had multiple surgeries on my knee. I have scar tissue that when people touch it, I have a little bit of neuropathy. It's really uncomfortable, right? That scar tissue can really impact the individual. So you have no idea what somebody's skin, how thick or thin, or what their skin looks like. So respond with empathy. They may be very tender in this area and very tough. So you can't assume that if somebody is hurt by something or vulnerable by something, that they don't have what it takes to be a healthcare provider. In fact, that empathy may make them a much better healthcare provider. So again, the empathy for both the source and the recipient. Inquiry of facts. Okay, again, what did you mean by that? Or you might be asking the recipients, how was that interaction for you? Using statements, I noticed, I thought, I felt, I experienced, I've been thinking about, as a way to begin the conversation. And then depending again on the recipient or the source, educate and engage. You might be educating the source and engaging with the recipients. How are you doing? I saw this happen. I was feeling like this happened. How are you doing? Did that impact you, right? For the source, if they're open, I just wanted you to know. I saw this thing and I just wanted you to know how this may have impacted, the recipient. All right, notes for the bystander. Every situation is different. I wish I could give you a formula and say, if this happens and this happens, this is what you do. But every situation is going to be different. Is this the time and the place? I know that as a faculty member in a class full of people, it would be humiliating for me to have a student say, Dr. Ackerman, what you said is racist. I'm just going to admit that I'm a human being. I would probably be humiliated, and it would be hard for me to process that information at that time. If I'm at the nurse's station or in a patient room and somebody's saying, what? That's really stupid. Like those are hard things to deal with. So is this the time and is this the place? Sometimes the best strategy is to go someplace private and address it at a different time. Sometimes right now is the only moment for it to happen. As a faculty member, when it's happening in the class, sometimes I need to model what the behavior should look like or how it could look like to intervene. So how do I do that in a way that preserves the dignity of the individuals and the relationships? Okay. And realizing that when a microaggression is happening, everybody there's a threat for everybody. For the recipient, obviously being seen as oversensitive or being harmed further, as the source being a racist or a homophobe, like this becomes your defining moment, or the bystanders being the cowards or those folks that do not hold up the principles of community that we want to uphold, right? So we need to be aware of all of those different things that are happening within that dynamic. So for the bystander, there are multiple ways that you can engage. And with all of these approaches, you need to find what works for you. Are you somebody that just says it straight up and you're going to just call it as you see it? If that's authentic for you, that's what you should do. You shouldn't try to take on something that's not right for you. So you might say under the awareness one, your surprise about Rick's score suggests a bias assumption. You might just call it as you see it and say it. I might be a little more subtle about it as part of my personality style. I'll tell you the one that works best for me. We're always going to respond with empathy and avoidance of judgment for the source and the recipient. That doesn't mean we let people get away with it, but it just means that we're suspending for a moment those negative assumptions that this person is a psychopath or a jerk or whatever. You can also use inquiry. For example, can you explain what your comment meant? What did you mean when you said that to Rick? You might also use I statements. I noticed that Rick seemed offended by the comment that you made. And you might also say, I'm feeling a little offended too. Like, I'm not quite sure what to think about that, right? The one that is probably more in line with my personality is assuming good intention. As your friend, or I know you didn't intend to stereotype anyone. Sometimes I mean that genuinely and sometimes I don't. But as your friend, I wanted to let you know that what you said could be interpreted that way. I'm an associate dean for health equity, diversity, inclusion. people expect me to have it all the time and have the right thing to say, but I'm just going to admit that I'm a regular person. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I've had people come and say, Piri, I know that diversity and inclusion is really important to you. And because of that, I wanted to let you know. And then you fill in the blank. And that's, hearing that is a way that I can I can take that in. Like, people see me as a whole person, that I'm not, only somebody that is ungraceful or microaggressing in this moment, but I'm a whole person who has this value system, and that they're giving me a gift in this moment. Other people, I mean, some people, when I ask them, how would you respond? Give me an example of how you would respond. Some people respond with humor. And humor has a wonderful place of making a point, but sort of, keeping the temperature in the room down. So if you're somebody who can joke around and use humor, power to you. That is actually something that's in your tool belt. If it's not, this is probably not the time for your comedic debut, right? You want to try it out in this is too high stakes, right? So do what is authentic for you in this moment. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to open up to questions, comments, reactions. I think we have about 10 more minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is your, I mean, did anything resonate with you? Do you have any that seems unrealistic? You have any questions?
I just like to start out with a comment. I mean, just that was amazing. I thought it was really, I do some presentations on microaggressions and response and upstander skills, and I do use your model. So I was really happy to hear it from you. And also, I really also like the focus on, that it's a continual process and that we're always learning. It's sort of that we're not going to achieve, an understanding and be done with it, but you're always sort of like moving. It really makes me think about, the process of cultural humility. And we have a talk on that later in the afternoon. And also being anti-racist, about that it's not a goal that you achieve. It's just you're always continuing learning. And that was sort of my question, is for people who aren't aware that they are the source, are there strategies that we can help them with for them to recognize? Because sometimes you realize that you were the source of something only once you acquire knowledge later on about some bias that you actually do hold, or how another group may perceive what you didn't mean to say, but the intent is different from the impact. And so are there any key clues or things that the source can sort of look for to figure out if you the source?
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, I definitely have those times when I become aware, oh my gosh, I've been saying this thing for years, or I've been doing this thing, and it's like this retrospective. Can I reach back 10 years in time and undo that? But really what I do is I recommit that I'm in this learning process, and I'm going to do better with this particular community that I have messed up with. But I think that we do have an obligation to lean into those areas of discomfort and lean into learning more about groups of people that we don't know a lot about, and we have some accountability for that, right? And that can actually be really fun. Like, that actually, learning about other groups of people. I mean, we consume movies and TV and books because learning about and understanding other people actually triggers the reward system in your brain. So it seems like it could be uncomfortable, but every time I learn something new about a group of people, I have this moment of, oh, I wish I would have known that sooner. I hope I didn't mess up. But wow, what a gift to understand. Let me just give you a quick example, and then I'm going to call on Dr. Francis Liu. People that are living with diverse ability. I just reached out to our diverse ability team and asked them how they experience microaggressions. And I knew that there would be microaggressions I didn't understand, but it really blew my mind. And let me just give you an example. A woman who is living with MS was talking about how when there's that moment about taking the stairs or the elevator, that she has been shamed for not taking the stairs. Like, oh, just get your steps in and get fit. Let's just take the stairs. And people not understanding that for her, the toll sometimes can be that it costs her a day or two, having exerted all of that energy going up the stairs rather than taking the elevator. I had never thought of that. I might have done that to people, not being aware of that. And so I can't think of a time that I did that, but I feel like I might have. So I'm going to do better. I'm going to recommit to doing better and to continuing to learn about that. And also noticing people's faces. You know, if people are like, oh, okay, you know what, but if they're like, oh, okay, right. Yeah, I'll take the stairs, and they're grunting up the stairs, maybe I missed something, right? Dr. Liu, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation that I think is very practical, very down to earth, lots of specifics, showing the complexity of the situation from these different points of view. Just great. I just wanted to alert my colleagues at Columbia that they're very fortunate that right there at Teachers College, Daryl Wing Su is a professor there. And he just came out as the lead author or editor of a book entitled Micro Intervention Strategies: What You Can Do to Disarm and Dismantle Individual and Systemic Racism and Bias. Just came out in January. So you might invite him to come and speak as well to follow up on this wonderful presentation. So thank you.
Yes, he, to me, like, forget like meeting Idris Elba. I'd rather meet Daryl Wing Su, right? I mean, he is this hero, an intellectual hero. So if he's down the road from you guys, yeah, I mean, he's across the country from me, so it's not so easy. But if you have a chance to interact with him, that would be amazing.
Francis, could you put the information in the chat that you just mentioned?
The
sure,
article.
I will do that. I'll do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's another hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a comment. So this was a very powerful talk and very personal talk, and I appreciate that you were being your authentic self. Some of the things that you have suggested for us really requires a certain amount of humility within all of us, right? How to be humble to receiving information and feedback about ourselves, a willingness to evolve as a human being in our strive for being better when we all may think of ourselves as being perfect and doing well. And maybe Dr. Wing Su in his book might have some interventions that we can use to help encourage people to be humble. I see that lack of humility serves as an obstacle for people to move past the point that they are stuck at. And I oftentimes encounter that with providers. I want to know from your experience, have you had any, do you have any strategies that we can use to really help people to be more humble about life experiences and being open to learning the lessons that other people or patients might have to teach them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a $1 million question that just 2 minutes to answer, but probably the most important question. And just ironically, I am traveling right now. I'm on a writing retreat. I'm writing a book about cultural humility as a framework to promote health equity. And I am co-authoring with a woman named Jan Marie Garcia, who was one of the 2 women who coined the term cultural humility in 1998. She's amazing. I don't know if you've had her talk, but you know, she lives it, she models it. And you know, it is really, really hard work to be humble. It can be hurtful to yourself, acknowledging the many ways that you go wrong. But one of the things that I want to remind people about is that ultimately you feel better. You feel rewarded by it. You're able to connect with people in a more authentic way. But what scares me, you know, in my practice is, what is it that I'm not seeing? Right? There are the things that I see, but what is it that I'm not seeing? And, you know, it can be just the smallest things, the assumptions about, like the one that came to me recently was the assumption about only smart people, or, you know, elite colleges have all the smart people. And if you come from a community college or something like that, you're not as smart as, when really it's about opportunity rather than anything else. And some community colleges, they're probably teaching better than some of the Ivy League colleges, but that's because we went to a college, we think it must be better. And that's egoism. And so it has to be a practice that we're doing every day. We're going to fall down on it sometimes, but we have to pick ourselves back up. Can we hold each other accountable in a way that's caring and loving? And there are going to be people that are not worthy of that. But what we're trying to do is to create an emergence, you don't just have, okay, we're going to move from this point to this point in this moment in time, and it's emergence that happens. And so we have to create that community. And so we're working toward that every day. And, it sounds simplistic, but the golden rule about trying to put out in the world what you want to see. Go ahead.
No, I said it is simplistic, but it's very difficult. And really, how do you make the determination that someone or some system is not worthy, right, to receive what you're talking about? I have a hard time with that because I feel like we're all worthy to receive, even though we're resistant at the moment or abscessing at the moment. But sometimes, that work can become very draining. And how do you choose your battles wisely? I still have a struggle with that because I feel like everyone can change. I just have to figure out a way to get them to have this epiphany or this revelation. And so that's a difficult task.
Yeah, and ongoing. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. I think that we're at time, but I'm just so happy that this is an important topic for you and that you're doing all of this work today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really dynamic talk, really important content. Just so happy that you could be here. I'm an admirer of yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.